Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, 27-year veteran of the NYPD. November 13th of this year will be November 13th, 2023, will be 1 year since the Idaho killings. And a lot of things have happened in that 1 year. Although, as much as things have happened, there are many things that we still don't know. And all we see the faces of these young victims on the screen: Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogen, Zaina Knodel, and Ethan Chapin. And we think of the horror that their families have endured for this 1 year. And again, November 13th is the 1 year anniversary. And a vigil to remember 4 University of Idaho students who were murdered last November is scheduled for 6 p.m. November 13th on the University of Idaho administration lawn. The vigil is being planned for University of Idaho students led by representatives of 3 Greek chapters: Pi Beta Phi, Sigma Chi, and Alpha Phi. The vigil is open to all and will feature speakers from the 3 Greek chapters as well as student body president Tanner McLean. Those associated with University of Idaho also encouraged to turn on their porch lights from 6 to 7 p.m. Pacific time, November 13th, as a sign of solidarity, according to the University of Idaho news release. It's important that the students lead this effort towards healing. We want to ensure we continue to tell their stories, to honor their legacy, and to provide a place where each student can heal. Together, we are moving forward. Again, Ethan Chapin, Zaina Knodel, Madison Mogen, and Kaylee Gonsalves were murdered on November 13th, 2022 at 1122 King Road. For those outside this case, and of course we that have been following this case from the very beginning, are outside it. We're not part of the family. We're not part of, most of us are not part of the University of Idaho community. However, we can still feel the pain and appreciate the things that have occurred here. And there are many still that believe that, we won't know if Brian Koberger, who was arrested in this case, is innocent or guilty till the trial begins and he gets a fair trial. Right now, there is no trial date set. That's how complicated this case has been. Because the case is a death penalty case, there is no start that has been. The judge has been giving a very liberal point of view when it comes to orders that he's given and directives that he's given and rulings that he has made. What the New York Times said about this case was a man who was studying for a PhD at a nearby university has been charged in the stabbing deaths of 4 University of Idaho undergraduates. I mean, just so hard to believe when we hear that. There's a picture on the screen of Brian Koberger. And though a suspect has been arrested and charged in the brutal stabbings of the 4 University of Idaho students in the middle of the night last fall, a series of mysteries remain about why the victims were targeted and what evidence prosecutors have against the suspect. The suspect, Brian Koberger, 28, who was a PhD student in criminology at a nearby university at the time, has offered an explanation for what he was doing on the night of the killings. In a court filing, his lawyer suggested that he was out driving alone around the time that the attack occurred in the pre-dawn hours of November 13th. Mr. Koberger has long had a habit of going for drives alone, they wrote. So is that's going to be the defense? Is that going to be part of his defense, an alibi such as that? Will anyone go for that? Will people believe that he was out driving by himself? And usually when you have an alibi, you need someone to confirm that alibi. Is there anyone that's going to come forward? and confirm the alibi that Brian Koberger and his defense attorney, Ann Taylor, are going to try to sell to the jury in order to create doubt? I don't know. I don't know if that could be a factor or not. It remains to be seen. So, folks, hold on to your seats, hold on to your hats, and get ready for Police Off the Cuff from True Crime, off the cuff from a police perspective.
There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch, Michael by there.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
You know, from the very beginning of this case, some of the parents of the students that were victims in this case were very vocal. Others sort of stayed in the shadows and didn't want to have their faces on the screen. However, Steve Gonzalez, the dad, and his wife, Vicky Gonzalez, they were more or less very outspoken. They lost their daughter, Kaylee Gonzalez, in this case. And even to the point where he became somewhat of a critic of the police and how long it took them. Remember when it stretched into 6 weeks, which is not long in a homicide investigation to not have a suspect. And he was very critical. You can understand. I'm not criticizing him. He lost his daughter. He wanted to be all over this. You could still see the pain in their faces to this day. I want to play this from News Nation.
A halt for a university town in Idaho, but the world really just stopped completely, just changed forever for the families of 4 students there. Their parents had shipped them off to college, but these 4 kids were savagely murdered within just a few months of school starting. And the house was just off campus. It is still right there, just off campus, boarded up like a frightening scar. 1122 King Road. The school, the prosecutors, even the defense wanted the house torn down as soon as possible. But some of the families didn't, and they fought it. And it's
we have Police Off the Cuff has from day one fought knocking this building down or voiced our opinions on our podcast. We feel it's so important to keep this building up through the trial, through the start and the finish of this trial, because we believe that the jurors should be allowed to take a walk through this building, because there's a special feeling that you get walking through a crime scene. And even if it's stripped down to its bare essentials, that aura or that eerie feeling will be delivered to the jury. And if the building's knocked down, they won't get to do that.
It's a good thing they did, because this week, prosecutors and the FBI were back there inside, clipboards in hand. News Nation senior national correspondent Brian Enton sat down with the parents of Kaylee Gonzalez, a victim of that crime.
Ashley, this has obviously been a difficult time for the victims' families in Idaho, the Goncalves family included. They say it's difficult to grieve when the court process is ongoing and frustrating for them because it's been so delayed. They did have a bit of a victory, though, they feel. You remember they fought to keep the house where the murders happened standing. The University of Idaho wanted to tear the house down. The Goncalves family fought it. The house ultimately was not torn down, and it turns out the FBI has now gone back out to the house. We reported on it this week. They went back out to the house to do 3D imaging. I spoke to the Goncalveses about that, and also just about the court process and what they want to see happen in general.
I knew in my heart what was best for those girls and Ethan. I knew what was best was to keep that around until they did more. And there'll be a point when I'll be like, you know what? Let it go. Let it go.
And our agenda of keeping it around isn't because, well, oh, it's going to be so sad when it's torn down. I mean, that is going to be sad to me. And people think, how can that tear it down? And it's just like, look, my daughter lived a happy life there. Yes, she was murdered there, ultimately murdered, but that was this much time. We have pictures of them in the house. When that house goes, it's going to be hard. I don't want to go in it. I've never.
Folks, we use the word, I think we overuse the word closure. And in no way is knocking that house down going to be closure to anyone. I think the University of Idaho and perhaps the community wants that house knocked down because it's a reminder of something horrific that occurred in that community. And I think that's the reason they want it knocked down, not for closure. And even for new students that are unfamiliar with the campus, weren't there last year when this happened on November 13th, 2022. But they want to go by and let's see. I want to go see 1122 King Road. Is it sort of a place where visitors to the campus, they want to see that house just because of it's infamous now? So in no way will, again, we overuse the word closure. Will this deliver closure to anyone if they do knock that house down? But rather, I believe it's detrimental to the case if they knock it down before the trial.
I've never even been to the house. I've never drove by it. I don't want to, but it's still going to be when they're like, that house is gone. It is going to be very emotional for me. But that wasn't why the emotional side of things. It was strictly is this good for the prosecution? Is this good for the case?
If he pled guilty and said, I'll plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence, have you thought about that?
Yeah, I don't want that because I do know I studied the criminal system and the difference between life and prison. Even if it's 20, 30 years, he's 23 hours locked up. He doesn't get to do what is it, BTK
killer?
PTK.
Or whatever.
We've found out that he writes papers for other prisoners and gets treated really well because he's intelligent and he's able to help other prisoners get preferential treatment through the legal system.
So you could see that the Gonsalveses have given this a lot of thought. And they are two of the parents that have been pushing for the penalty to be the death penalty, if in fact they get a conviction in this case. And that's why the judge in this case, Judge John Judge, which is such an apropos name for a judge. There's a picture of Judge John Judge on the screen right there. He's going to take his time because every decision he makes in this case will be somehow subject to appeal, because pretty much every single death penalty case that winds up in a conviction gets appealed. And that just happens to be a fact. So he's going to make sure, I know it gets cliche to say he's going to make sure that he crosses his T's and dots his I's, but that's a fact, folks. Everything he does is going to be looked at by not just other judges, but another court, a whole other panel of judges, to see if all the legal decisions that he makes and has made passes muster. And that's why he's going to take his time. There is no date set yet for this trial. Remember how in the beginning they were pushing, we want a speedy trial, so that, the defense realized how much discovery material was, and perhaps the defense attorney Ann Taylor realized how much evidence there is against her client. So no one's in a rush to do anything, either the prosecutor or the defense.
We don't want that type of behavior to happen in our case where he has influence outside of this event. So
That's been a hard one, though. I mean,
he could write a book, he can do things. Idaho doesn't have a law particular that protects against that.
The hard thing with that question, honestly, is that's where you forget, and I don't know how it's possible, but you forget that there's 3 other families involved here. We're not the only ones. It's not just, I'm like, this is not a one,
One crime fits all.
This is,
Right.
this isn't just our daughter.
Right. Some
And I
might
know
not
that
want to go through the trial.
I know some of the other families definitely would be, yes, like, let's go. Where do I sign? And I understand that 100%. 100%. I understand that. But you know what? Ultimately, it's not our call. I mean, they might ask us our opinion like they did on the death penalty, and we'll give it. But just because, our opinion is yay or nay doesn't mean that, that's.
It's amazing how different people feel. Ethan Chapin's family, what a beautiful family. He was he was a triplet. He has both a brother and a sister. And I can't even imagine, and some of you folks may be in the chat, maybe are parents of triplets or twins even. And twins have a very special bond. Don't forget they were in the womb together for 9 months. So I would imagine the same is true or more so with triplets. So Ethan Chapin's brother and sister, can you even imagine the pain they've gone through in this coming up on 1 year anniversary, November 13th, of their brother? And they have a real forgiving, loving family that have chosen to stay away from this case. And the way they have gotten closure was building a memorial. It'd be something with tulips, I think they give away in his memory, or they sell them in his memory and they donate the money. But just very different. And I'm not, again, at all criticizing Gonsalves. I think I would be more like them if I lost a family member. You'd almost be obsessed with seeing justice through for your loved one. And that's what I think they are. I don't think they can letting go is no such thing as letting go, but I think they have to be front stage. They have to be on top of it at all times.
What we get.
The Goncalves parents have said that they are for the death penalty in the Brian Kohberger case. But again, it's just frustrating for them how long all of this is taking. They have to take vacation days and plan their whole life with work around when these court hearings happen. And many times the hearings pop up at the last minute. This all while they continue to try and grieve for Christy, Kaylee's mom. She says that it's difficult for her to go through Kaylee's things and to go into her bedroom.
But I've only been up to Kaylee's room. I mean, it's right up there, right at the top of the stairs. I've only been up there twice. And neither time was for any amount of time. It was like in and out. Oops, in, out. That's all we have. That is it. And it's just real. It's just so real sometimes. And it's just the worst that somebody could do this to somebody's family. So many families.
The Goncalves family really is just so strong despite everything that they've been through. Obviously, this is an especially difficult time with the 1 year mark of the murders coming up on November 13th.
Thank you.
So, folks, you could see how raw it still is. And I apologize. I think I erroneously referred to Christy Gonsalves as Vicky. I apologize. Christy and Steve Gonsalves. And they are the family, of course, that have been front and center and have been really speaking out and talking about the case. Even early on, they were all over it because they felt that the police weren't doing a good job. And even like we covered this case from the beginning, and I worked hundreds and hundreds of homicides. I'm not going to say thousands. I've worked hundreds of homicides as a boss, a sergeant in Manhattan North Homicide Squad. And 6 weeks in a case like this, a complicated case like this, is not a long time. And that's how long it took them to arrest Brian Kohberger. But yet the media was pushing the narrative, oh, should the Moscow police be pulled off the case? Should the case be given to the FBI? Should they remove them, bring in some, some ringers, some top investigators from around the world to investigate this case? And because the media felt that 6 weeks was taking too long, So the FBI went back to 1122 King Road, of course, which is the crime scene this week, because they were going to do some digital 3D assessment of the crime scene. The technology today is just incredible. Let me play a little bit of this.
That the FBI, frankly, was created for is to give that level of expertise that local law enforcement just doesn't have or access to.
Nearly 1 year after the quadruple homicide that shocked the nation, FBI agents are headed back to the scene of the crime in the University of Idaho murders.
They're going to take one last crack at this, so to speak, and they're going to be able to argue that this was a fresh look, that they didn't do anything. They're not retesting the same stuff. This is new stuff that they're testing.
It's a case Law and Crime Network has followed since the beginning, when the bodies of 4 college students were found brutally murdered on November 13th of last year. All 4 victims were students at the University of Idaho in Moscow. For weeks, we covered the developing story as authorities gave few clues about the investigation. But in late December, suspect Brian Koberger was arrested and later charged in all 4 murders.
It alleges that the defendant, Brian C. Koberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, state of Idaho, did unlawfully enter a residence located at 1122 King Road, Moscow, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder.
Now, FBI agents are back at the King Road crime scene for what's likely the final time. Former FBI agent Colin Schmidt tells Law and Crime Network the investigation will be strategic ahead of Koberger's jury trial.
It appears that they wanted the evidence response team of the FBI, since they're having this pause in the court case, to go in there and start doing some 3D modeling of the crime scene.
Prosecutors say Koberger is responsible for the stabbing deaths of Zana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonzalez. Investigators used DNA recovered from a knife sheath left at the crime scene to connect Koberger to the case. He was arrested at his parents' home in Pennsylvania before he was extradited to Idaho.
Detectives arrested 28-year-old Brian Christopher Koberger in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, on a warrant for murders of Ethan, Zana, Madison, and Kaylee.
That Chief Fry, early on in the investigation, I felt that he was in way over his head. And something, he really came through in shining colors. And you could see, and just in reading the names of the victims, how difficult that was for him to say that. He was almost breaking down in tears. And, that shows he's a human being, and it's this case has not only taken a huge toll on the families, but a huge toll on the community, on the friends, on the university, the town, the businesses, the whole area of Moscow, Idaho, just almost standing still as this unfolded.
Since then, Koberger's been held at the Latah County Jail in Moscow, only about a mile and a half from the murder scene. He was set to stand trial last month, but that was delayed indefinitely after prosecutors argued they needed more time to create models of the home to present to jurors. Schmidt says that's what this new investigation is all about.
The FBI ERT, evidence response team, is going in there and they want to get a really perfect 3D model of what happened. So when they have to present all this evidence in court, the jury is going to really know exactly what happened.
As Schmidt explains, investigators will use the Faro technique, 3D technology that, according to its website, quote, allows you to capture complete, accurate views of the on-scene evidence and generate photorealistic 360-degree views of the space. Schmidt says the FBI has been utilizing this technique for years.
I was part of the San Bernardino shooting investigation back in 2015 as a supervisor. And during that investigation, our evidence response team actually went in, and unfortunately, they had to do this with the bodies still in place. And they set up lasers, and they were using the FARO technique, or the FARO equipment back then. And basically, what that means is they're using LiDAR technology to actually create a 3D model of the crime scene, and then so that it can be presented in court. So it was done in two phases, one with the bodies in place, and then once all the bodies were removed from the San Bernardino shooting site, they did it again to make sure they had an accurate depiction of actually what happened.
For the university.
You know, amazing. Of course, you would rather have that than not have it, but I still think that there is absolutely no substitute for walking through the crime scene, walking through that physical building, of seeing what it's like inside that location. But again, this technology, 3D laser technology, exacting specifications, exacting distances, exacting locations as to where a piece of evidence is recovered from. I think that you can't beat that as far as a piece of evidence. Remember also last year, before he was arrested, Brian Koberger driving home or to Pennsylvania with his father. And remember these car stops. I'm going to play a little bit of this car stop.
Hello. How you doing? How y'all doing today? Good, good. Take a look at your driver's license real quick if I could. See, he's right up on that van, man. He was right up on the back end of that van. Pulled you over for tailgating.
You know, there was a still taken from this car stop that showed a rather pronounced scar on his right hand near his wrist. And it was a horizontal scar. And I don't know if you're going to be able to see it in this short video, but there was a still produced from this. And I thought that was, as a piece of evidence, it showed that he very possibly cut himself.
Is this your car? Okay, cool. Where are you headed?
Well, we're coming from WSU, and we're standing early.
What's WSU?
Yeah, I go to the university basically. That is SWAT team area.
So we're okay. I'm having a hard time hearing you because of the traffic. So you're coming from Washington State University, and you're going where? Oh,
We're going to be going to Pennsylvania.
oh, okay.
Yeah. So we're slightly punchy because we're driving for hours.
Hours, days.
Hours to drive. Well, almost a day.
Okay. And what did you say about some SWAT team thing? Or
Yeah, there was a mass shooting and everything.
Where?
You know, one of the things that I took out of this crime scene, and to me, he always appeared to be rather nervous and rather spooked. I'm talking about Brian Koberger. Someone mentioned in the chat that they didn't think that his father was involved. I agree with you. I don't think his father knew anything. But I think every time Brian Koberger, even when he was pulled over months before this crime, he had that sort of creepy, spooky look on his face. And in this instance, I think that he does look nervous. He does look like he knows something that someone else definitely does not know. So these car stops were a good thing, I believe.
Interesting.
Well, it's horrifying because he's supposed to be university, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So y'all work at the university there?
I actually do work there.
Oh.
PhD in criminal.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I hadn't heard about that incident. Just yesterday, or?
No, this happened yesterday. About an hour and a half ago, we're still wrapping it up for investigation. I'm not sure there's two shooters, but they did shoot somebody.
What they're saying really doesn't mean anything. It's just their demeanor that I think is interesting to watch during this crime, excuse me, this car stop.
So do me a favor, don't follow too close, okay? All right, thank you. Appreciate you.
Well, that was one of two car stops, and of course, people had sort of accused the FBI of using the state police to make those car stops because they wanted to take a look at Brian Koberger and his father and see his demeanor, see if he had any cuts on his hands, see the interior of the car, see if they could get a good look at the car. After all, everything these days is on body cam video, which is so useful. You know, it really is such a useful technology. And in that, we wouldn't have that to play, that to recreate if it wasn't for body cam video. So going back to the house here.
University of Idaho crime scene. Schmidt tells us they'll use the Faro technique to collect images and measurements.
So using LiDAR, believe it or not, we have LiDAR on our phones. So it's actually this little button right here on our iPhones, and it's used basically, and what LiDAR stands for is light detection and ranging technology. And it's used for 3D crime scene reconstruction, but for our purposes on phones, we use it for low light photos to basically get an autofocus.
But investigators will have to work fast. The University of Idaho, that owns the home, agreed to open it to FBI agents for only 2 days, October 31st and November 1st.
2 days means 48 hours. So they'll be in there for 48 hours. They'll be in there round the clock. They have almost limitless resources. So in this case, if they need to bring in teams from LA, from Seattle, from New York, all these teams have the same training, and then some of them have specialized training. So there's no doubt that they'll stay in there, and 2 days will, obviously the FBI wants 5 days or 10 days, but in 2 days they will plan for it and make sure they have the appropriate resources there to get the job done.
As Lawn Crime Network reported, the university intends to demolish the home, but those plans were stalled back in January when the defense motioned to preserve the crime scene.
You know, we all agreed that, I mean, at least I did. And there were a lot of people that have worked crime scenes, that have been in the police service before, and really believe that this home should be preserved. And regardless of the amount of technology they have, there's nothing like a jury to be able to walk through the actual crime scene, feel that aura of that crime scene. And I know maybe many of you don't know what I'm talking about, but there is a feeling you get when you walk through a crime scene, especially when you know what occurred at that location. So I think that it's sort of important for them to keep that home preserved until after this trial. It may sound like a broken record, but I really, really do believe that. It's very important to keep that home preserved. And no matter what they have, Faro technology, 3D technology, thousands of photographs of the crime scene, there is nothing like walking through the actual crime scene. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring that bell. If you want to contribute to us, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels, and we have a YouTube channel membership with, count them, 5 different levels. And you could contribute to us either on our Patreon or by joining us on our YouTube. This week there was some decisions made by Judge. And one of the biggest things, the biggest pieces of evidence, of course, is right on the screen, is that, of course, the K-bar knife has never been recovered, but the sheath underneath it has. And the biggest piece of evidence that we are talking about was DNA that was recovered on the knife sheath. And right away, the defense, of course, is trying to downplay that by saying, oh, it was touch DNA. Touch DNA can be transferred onto an object much easier than, for example, blood, biological fluids, other things like that, hair. So this is touch DNA. So the DNA, was it transferred through sweat, the sweat on someone's hand, and then through a technique called investigative genetic genealogy, it was identified through building a family tree, which the FBI did, and which the judge now is asking for that, the methodology and how they came up with Brian Koberger's father's DNA on the knife sheath originally. And then, of course, they took a buccal swab of Brian Koberger, and it clearly was his. I mean, not 100%. No DNA match is ever 100%. But so the judge made some decisions this week in ordering the FBI to present the discovery evidence from how they built the genetic genealogy.
Sufficient time.
The clock is ticking for prosecutors in the University of Idaho quadruple murders case as a judge implements a new deadline for the state to hand over DNA evidence to be used in the trial.
It seems like this is really just the beginning of the process.
In a last-minute hearing on Thursday, Judge John Judge gave accused murderer Brian Koberger a win when he implemented a December 1st deadline. That means prosecutors have just under a month to turn over genetic genealogy and DNA evidence to the defense. Brian Enton, a senior national correspondent with News Nation, was in the courtroom on Thursday. He tells Law & Crime Network the entire hearing centered around genetic evidence the defense is hoping to get its hands on.
Basically, the reports have to go to the judge first to review. There's a lot of confidential information that could possibly be in these reports because they involve like family trees of people who are totally unconnected to the case. So the judge has to review the reports first, and then we'll decide what to give to the defense. But the judge hasn't even gotten the reports yet. It came out in court today. The prosecutor said that they're still waiting on reports from the FBI. It's turning into this really long process. And so the new deadline for the judge to get the reports is now December 1st.
Now remember, DNA evidence is a big part of the state's case. That's how they tied Koberger to the murders in the first place. Investigators used DNA from a knife sheath left behind at the crime scene to track down Koberger. They compared DNA from Koberger's father, gathered from his trash all the way in Pennsylvania, to that found on the sheath in Idaho. They quickly determined it was a match, and later investigators scored a near perfect match when a cheek swab from Koberger himself was collected this summer. But as for the evidence discussed in Thursday's hearing, it's still a question mark. Did they give any specific examples of what this evidence could be?
No, they didn't get into specifics, but it's interesting because it's kind of like a new science. The judge today alluded in court to the fact that this hasn't been used in Idaho cases much before, maybe ever before. So it's new to him. And it's interesting. I mean, if you remember, basically they, when they found the DNA on the knife sheath at the murder scene, they then used this investigative genetic genealogy to go back, 23andMe and these companies where you give your DNA, they can get access to those databases. And that's how they narrowed down.
Actually, the law enforcement friendly databases, the only ones that allow law enforcement to use it without a search warrant are something called GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. Everyone always says Ancestry and 23andMe. Then those are the two sites that collect DNA from people for various different reasons, who do not allow law enforcement to use their databases minus a search warrant. So but people always say, oh, 23andMe and Ancestry. And those are the two that do not let law enforcement use them.
The suspect pool to get to Brian Kohberger.
It's been nearly 1 year since the 4 University of Idaho students were found brutally murdered. On November 13th of 2022, Moscow officials received a 911 call reporting someone unconscious in a home near campus. First responders found the bodies of Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonzalez stabbed to death. It wasn't until weeks later in late December when Kohberger was arrested.
Detectives arrested 28-year-old Brian Christopher Kohberger in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, on a warrant for murder of Ethan, Xana, Madison, and Kaylee.
Kohberger was taken into custody at his parents' home in Pennsylvania and then later extradited to Idaho. Since then, he's been held at the Latah County Jail in Moscow, less than 2 miles from the crime scene. That's where he appeared virtually to Thursday's court hearing.
I couldn't see him, but he appeared via Zoom with his lawyer. The camera on the Zoom was focused on his lawyer and Taylor. They were in the basement below the courtroom, which is where the jail is. There's a small jail here in Latah County.
Did they make any mention as to why it was via Zoom and not in person if they were so close?
They've done this before with Zoom when it's more of a scheduling hearing and not something really significant. They'll do the hearing on Zoom, just I think more as convenience for all the parties involved.
You know, when they do a Zoom hearing like that, it is absolutely what Brian Enton is saying for the convenience, because every time they move an inmate, a high-level inmate like Brian Kohberger, the security levels have to be very, very high. So if they can just leave him in the jail, because it's not in front of a jury or anything like that, and hold that hearing via Zoom, it really saves the criminal justice system a lot of time and money to have to move this defendant from one location to another. You know, when we talk about the evidence in this case, of course, the strongest evidence in this case is the knife sheath with the DNA on it, which is pretty damn powerful. But will a defense be able to come up with a reason that that's not? Or are they going to be able to thwart that evidence? Are they going to be able to come up with a reason that someone planted it there, and it's not as strong evidence as most people would think? There's no doubt. There's no doubt that they will come up with that, and there's no doubt that they're going to come up with an excuse as to why this isn't strong evidence, that this could have been passed on. This could have been transferred. Someone else could have planted it there. We're going to hear that. We're going to hear the planting of evidence. Early on in this case, of course, because of the DNA evidence, the touch DNA evidence on the knife sheath, because of that, one of the experts of investigative genetic genealogy in this country is someone named C.C. Moore. And I've played this video numerous times, but it's very, it allows the layperson like us that aren't experts in this to really understand it. I'm going to play a little bit of C.C. Moore. And this was about 6 or 9 months ago. She appeared on CNN when they first discovered this evidence. And I want to play a little bit of this. Is C.C. Moore.
DNA testing. The very next day, the lab was able to match a DNA profile obtained from the trash as all but assured as being from the biological father to a person whose DNA was found on the knife sheath. As the document states, at least 99.9998% of the male population would be expected to be excluded from the possibility of being the suspect's biological father. Joining me now is C.C. Moore, head of genetic genealogy services for Parabon Nanolabs Law Enforcement Unit, which has made more than 200 successful identifications of violent criminals. She's not worked the Idaho case. She stars in the documentary series The Genetic Detective, now streaming on ABC, and she has worked on all 10 seasons of the PBS television documentary series Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates Jr. Cece, thank you for being here. What does this mean? Single source of male DNA, which I'm reading from the affidavit?
It means there were no other DNA detected on that, meaning sometimes you can have a mixture. You can have multiple people's DNA. You want to have single source DNA if at all possible, because that really just ties that one person to that item. Now, it was likely that this was touch DNA. Certainly it's possible there was blood. They didn't tell us what type of DNA, but most likely it was touch DNA. And that would typically be just a few skin cells. This might have been a very small amount of DNA, but because of today's technological advances, we can detect even the tiniest bit of DNA.
How reliable is touch DNA if it is skin cells in comparison to, say, blood?
It's a great question. It is more transferable. So of course you would like to have blood, you would like to have semen or saliva, and they might. You know, they haven't shown all their cards. We don't know all that they have. But touch DNA, now that we can use it because of the sensitivity of our equipment, it also means you have to be more cautious about using DNA as your only evidence. So it's a really positive thing that they clearly have other evidence. This is just one piece of it. We have seen DNA, touch DNA transfer in other cases. Of course, it's fairly rare, but it is something that you have to be aware of and make sure that there are other aspects of the case also pointing at the same person.
Cece, good news, I guess. It's hard to commit murder without leaving something behind.
That's right. Yeah, I've been saying this for weeks. That type of violent, intimate crime, it is virtually impossible not to leave something behind, even if you are a criminology PhD student. So I am not at all surprised they were able to find something. Even if he tried hard not to leave something, you still would. And that is great news, because what it means is that anyone who perpetrates this type of crime in the future should be aware that they will be identified. They will be caught. There really is no reason that we should see serial killers, serial rapists moving forward. This guy, you know, potentially could have become a Ted Bundy or even a Zodiac, not identified 50 years later. But because of the DNA technology, the advances that we're seeing, both in investigative genetic genealogy and the ability to use tiny amounts of DNA, we can identify someone, whether they are in the law enforcement database or not.
Cece, the cases that you have cracked, for which you have become famous, are the cases that necessitate you putting together, in connection with a private lab, a very complicated family history, family tree, and tracing back cousins and generations.
This is what the FBI will have to explain. This is what the judge has ordered for them to turn over by December 1st. Very difficult, but so this has to have been documented to the T. And CeCe Moore is explaining this now. So someone from the FBI, when this case goes to trial, will have to explain their investigative genetic genealogy familial chart that they made. And that's one of the reasons in discovery, building this genetic genealogy family tree, if you will, uncovers people that have nothing to do with this. However, generations and generations, people are interconnected with each other. And that's what this investigative genetic genealogy family tree will uncover. And that's why it has to be a very private bit of discovery that the judge will first check through before he allows anyone else to see it.
That doesn't seem to be what took place here.
Well, I don't think we can reach that conclusion yet. Investigative genetic genealogy is simply a tip. It's a lead generator. It should never be used as evidence against a suspect. And so it is proper that it would have been left out of the affidavit, in my opinion, because it should not form the basis of an arrest warrant. And so even though they didn't put it in there, I don't think we can rule it out. We don't know whether it was what initially identified him as a person of interest, and then they looked more closely at that tip about the car, or it could have gone the other way, where they identified him through that tip about the car. And at the same time, they were working on the genetic genealogy and may have built his family tree to see if it was consistent with what they were seeing. I have done that in some cases. If there are persons of interest, you can very quickly rule them out or potentially not be able to exclude them, which is what would have happened in this case. Maybe they could have connected him to one or more of those matches, maybe a second, third, fourth cousin, and said, look, you know, this is somebody who is a strong person of interest. So I think there's still a lot for us to learn on what happened here. I do think it is highly likely that an advanced private outside lab was used, at least somehow in this case. You know, we've all been hearing whispers of this. There's been lots of leaks that investigative genetic genealogy was used. So I do think that they were at least trying to, or in the process of doing so.
And you make a great point. They of course don't have to put in this affidavit of probable cause. They, the prosecutors, all that they have. CC.
So pretty amazing. I think she explains it pretty damn well. And now when we talk about the evidence in this case, of course, you know, we don't like to use the term smoking gun because there really is no smoking gun in this case. There's some very strong evidence, and some of the strongest evidence, of course, is the digital evidence, the phone evidence, the cell site evidence. Perhaps there may be computer evidence. There may be text messages between. We don't know. We don't know if Brian Koberger ever text messaged anyone involved in this case. Did he? That's something that the prosecution is not ready to turn over or to let anyone know. Again, we saw all of the arrest affidavit, the probable cause affidavit, but it's just an incredible thing. So when we connect what's known as circumstantial evidence from what inferences are drawn, from how they are drawn, that evidence, when connected together, is incredible because it's evidence that singularly you might not say, oh, it's that strong, but when you connect all of this evidence together, you connect the DNA evidence on the knife sheath, you connect the white vehicle, the Hyundai Elantra, you connect the fact that that Hyundai Elantra was seen 12 prior times reconning 1122 King Road. You find out that that vehicle belongs to a PhD student at the Washington State University, very close by university. All of those things are strong evidence. Again, circumstantial. But as I've said a million times, circumstantial evidence can be very, very strong evidence when you connect the dots together, when you pile up that circumstantial evidence together. Law and Crime put together a rather interesting thing on some of the evidence again against Brian Koberger. I'm going to play a little bit of this.
Conducted in the area of the King Road residence. This video canvas was to obtain any footage from the early morning hours of November 13, 2022 in the area of the King Road residence and surrounding neighborhoods in an effort to locate the suspects or suspect vehicles traveling to or leaving from the King Road residence. This video canvas resulted in the collection of numerous surveillance videos in the area from both residential and business addresses. I have reviewed the numerous videos that were collected and have had conversations with other officers, and they go on to say that. A review of camera footage indicated, and this is where that white Hyundai Elantra comes into play. A review of camera footage indicated that a white sedan, hereafter suspect vehicle 1, was observed traveling westbound in the 700 block of Indian Hills Drive in Moscow at approximately 3:26 a.m. and westbound on Steiner Avenue at Idaho State Highway 95 in Moscow at approximately 3:28 a.m. On this video, it appeared suspect vehicle 1 was not displaying a front license plate. At this point, they didn't know it was the the vehicle that we now know, the white Hyundai Elantra. This is how they first were able to identify it. A review of footage from multiple videos obtained from the King Road neighborhood showed multiple sightings of suspect vehicle 1 starting at 3:29 a.m. and ending at 4:20 a.m. Remember the timeline of when they think these murders occurred. These sightings show suspect vehicle 1 makes an initial 3 passes by the 1122 King Road residence and then leave via Walenta Drive. Based off of my experience as a patrol officer, this is a residential neighborhood with a very limited number of vehicles that travel in the area during the early morning hours. Upon review of the video, there are only a few cars that enter and exit this area during this time frame. Again, this is also important because remember, he is charged with first-degree murder. There is a level of premeditation and planning to this. Keep this in mind as we hear all of this. Suspect vehicle 1 can be seen entering the area a 4th time at approximately 4:04 a.m. It can be seen driving eastbound on King Road, stopping and turning around in front of 500 Queen Road, number 52, and then driving back westbound on King Road. When suspect vehicle 1 is in front of the King Road residence, it appeared to unsuccessfully attempt to park or turn around in the road. The vehicle then continued to the intersection of Queen Road and King Road, where it can be seen completing a 3-point turn and then driving eastbound again down Queen Road. Suspect vehicle 1 is next seen departing the area of the King Road residence at approximately 4:20 a.m. at a high rate of speed. Suspect vehicle 1 is next observed traveling southbound on Walenta Drive. Based on my knowledge of the area and review of camera footage in the neighborhood, that does not show suspect vehicle 1 during that time frame. I believe that suspect vehicle 1 likely exited the neighborhood at Palouse River Drive and Conestoga Drive. Palouse River Drive is at the southern edge of Moscow and proceeds into Whitman County, Washington. Eventually, the road leads to Pullman, Washington. Pullman, Washington is approximately 10 miles from Moscow, Idaho. Both Pullman and Moscow are small college towns, and people commonly travel back and forth between them. We talked about this before when he was ultimately apprehended, the connection, the geographical distance between his university and where these murders occurred. I'm going to continue on. Law enforcement officers provided video footage of suspect vehicle 1 to forensic examiners with the FBI that regularly utilizes surveillance footage to identify the year, make, and model of the.
You know, folks, to play like devil's advocate too, I know the defense will say, well, were you ever able to catch a image of the defendant inside his vehicle? Were you able to capture an image of his license plate? No, the answer is a no. So this is how the game of doubt is played also, right? Because it's a white car, and the fact that Brian Koberger happens to own a white Hyundai Elantra, and the fact that his cell phone pings on 12 prior occasions in that white car matched someone that was reconnaissance, checking out, doing a dry run of a location. That is circumstantial evidence, of course, strong circumstantial evidence, right? And then, of course, Law and Crime was describing his conduct the early morning hours of driving back into the parking lot of 1122 King Road, where this horrific crime took place. So all of those things. And, you know, one of the things that's not really mentioned, Dylan Mortensen, one of the roommates that survived, that the perpetrator, if you want to believe that it was Brian Koberger, or you want to believe it was a male white fitting the physical description of Brian Koberger, approximately 6 foot, 6'1" tall, 185 pounds, athletic build with bushy eyebrows, wearing a mask over his face, wearing dark clothing. That's the description that Dylan Mortensen gives. So if you want to believe that that person is Brian Koberger, that's another piece of circumstantial evidence. However, I mentioned this on numerous occasions as I covered this case. What if Dylan Mortensen says, I have no doubt that the person sitting in this courtroom next to defense attorney Ann Taylor is the person I saw on the morning of November 13th, 2022. Would she be able to say that? I mean, the defense would attack that like a rabid dog. But what if she did say that? What if she said, by the way he moves, his gait, the shape of his head, the shape of his eyebrows, the shape of his eyes, the look on his face, oh, you could identify someone that had a mask over their face? Well, it depends what she says. Could that not be extremely, extremely powerful evidence? And I'm not saying she can. I'm playing devil's advocate. You know, folks, we always want to remember that this case is about the 4 victims, Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonzalez, Zana Knodel, and Madison Mogen. And we never want to lose sight of that when we cover all the things that occurred in this case, and we talk about the evidence, we talk about the perpetrator, we talk about the case, we talk about the town, we talk about the families left behind. What we really are concerned with mostly on this coming up anniversary, November 13th, 2023, the 1-year anniversary, is these 4 victims, the 4 victims of this case: Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonzalez, Zana Knodel, and Madison Mogen. So even though there's been some new occurrences in this case regarding evidence and decisions that the judge made recently, well, just last week, he made a decision that will allow cameras in the courtroom, right? Many people, of course, many media people, many people that have been following this case were extremely happy over that. I was a little bit conflicted about that. I don't know if cameras in the courtroom give you the same type of fairness in a case that it does when cameras are not allowed in the courtroom. So I was a little bit conflicted about that. But I think that Brian Kohlberger is going to get a fair trial. There is too much riding on this case for him not to. There's too many eyes on this case for him not to. There's too many people from all over the world watching this case. And it's all really on the shoulders of this man, Judge John Judge. And of course, the defense attorney, Ann Taylor, the main defense attorney. I'm sure she's going to have help. And the prosecutor, Bill Thompson, who also will have help from the state attorney general's office. And of course, all the police help, all of the outstanding investigators they had from the very beginning on this case, when they were criticized as not having the talent to pursue this case, not having the talent to be able to make an arrest in this case. And we saw that was all put to sleep. Folks, if you're looking for a great defense attorney in the New York metropolitan area, then Joe Murray is your man. Joe's a retired NYPD police officer and a fantastic defense attorney. You can reach Joe on his cell phone at 718-514-3855, or you can email him at joe@jmurray-law.com, or go on his website, jmurray-law.com. Not only is Joe a fabulous defense attorney, but he's a huge supporter of the Police Off the Cuff podcast. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think that we all know that this case is enormously complicated. And the thing, it's proceeding slowly as it should be, because they want to get this case right. Both the prosecution, the defense, and of course the judge especially wants to get this case right. So when will it proceed? When will the trial start? We don't know. All we know is that 1-year anniversary is coming up for these 4 people on the screen: Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogen, Zana Knodel, and Kaylee Gonzalez. And we pray for them, and we wish their families the very best in healing. And I don't think you'll ever get over something like this. I don't think you'll ever recover from something like this. But on the 1-year anniversary, our prayers are with them, and they will never be forgotten. This is Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in this afternoon. Have a great night, and I'll see you next time.
One episode just ain't enough.